but yeah, okay, I guess we'll just get started. So thanks for being here. This is the January 2020 Schulich Leader Alumni Webinar Panel. And on this one, we're going to be focusing on sort of the transition from an undergraduate degree to a graduate degree. And that's where the panelists come in. So I won't really be talking about this, but I'll just be asking the panelists some questions. And the Schulich Leader Network is hoping to host several more webinars throughout the year, focusing on other areas. And so I guess the panelists this time around, there should be three. Right now there's just two. And so the first is Ella Thompson. Ella is was a 2013 Schulich Leader at the University of Manitoba. She got her Bachelor of Engineering in Electrical Engineering, and she is currently a PhD candidate in Electrical Engineering at Stanford University. And then our second panelist right now is Jonah Zankl, and he is also a 2013 Schulich Leader, but at the University of Calgary. His undergrad was in Applied Math and Economics, and currently he's a Master's in Philosophy and PhD candidate in Organizational Theory and Information Systems at the University of Cambridge. And I guess before I move on, is there anything either of you would like to add to that, or if I got any of those wrong?
No, that was all right, for me at least.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, cool. So I guess we could just move right into questions. So of all of our participants, if you have any questions right off the bat, feel free. I guess you could try unmuting yourself and then asking a generic question for both of our panelists, or if you have a more specific question. And if that's not working super well, then I'll just start working through some of the questions that I have built up. Okay, I'll just start with a couple of questions then. So there was a form sent out for advanced questions. So the first one is from Aaron Grenke. I don't know what year, I'm not sure what year they're in. But anyway, their question was, or one of their questions was, is there a hard GPA cutoff for Ivy League schools? If so, what is the ballpark for Stanford, MIT, etc.? Yeah, so you're both in pretty high ranked universities. So what is, from your experience, what is the ballpark GPA cutoff range?
So in my experience, there's definitely not like a hard cutoff at Stanford, at least. And I think for most of the other schools that I applied to as well. I think in my experience, what they were looking for was mostly like a well-rounded applicant. So someone who has some experience maybe in research, or at least a demonstrated interest in research. Of course, like they want to see that you were applying yourself in undergrad. So like GPA and GRE scores obviously come into that. But I don't think that there was a hard and fast cutoff for any of the like scores related to GPA or GRE. And I think things like interviews and then also just research or work experience are quite valuable for the applications as well.
Jonah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think fairly similar for most European schools. Cambridge words it slightly differently, that you have to have a first-class honors degree. So in my case, that worked out quite well, because the requirement for that at University of Calgary was a little bit lower than what the standard international equivalent was. You know, most top programs, you know, if you're in the 3.5 or above kind of ballpark, you're probably in the right range. But then, you know, a really good point brought up by Ella, that It's not necessarily just GPA. It could be things like the GRE or GMAT or LSATs or any other kind of standardized test, to keep that in mind that you might need that as well. And oftentimes if you think or just come across that you need it by the time you're applying, it's too late. So kind of start planning that in advance.
Okay, and I guess on that note, since I don't think the GRE is common in Canada from what I'm aware of. So, but Ella, I'm assuming you would have had to write a GRE exam.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, and how was, like, I guess, could you sort of walk us through, you know, what that experience was like? How important was it for your application? And like maybe how long did you know you were going to have to write the GRE for?
Sure. Yeah, so I really started thinking about my grad school applications kind of around end of my third year of undergrad. So most of the applications for me were due like around winter of my fourth year of undergrad. So the summer before I started preparing, so I like researched what I needed to apply for schools in the States and then in Canada as well. And so I saw that I had to do the GRE. So really just the summer before, maybe from like May till beginning of August, I was studying like on and off, definitely not full time. I was doing a research internship that summer, but I put a little bit of time into the GRE. So the sections, at least when I did it, were math, reading, and writing. So I found mostly for the math and writing sections, I really just did practice questions, went through some like old exams and practice questions that were provided. And then I spent most of my time studying vocabulary for the reading section, because that was definitely like my weakness going in. And then I took the exam just one time. I think I did it like middle or end of August that summer, and then got the scores back pretty soon after. And so I didn't do it like a second time. And again, I don't think like there wasn't, at least for me, a hard cutoff that I needed to meet for applying. And I don't think like a point or two is really what's likely going to make the difference for grad school. But there are, like you can typically look up for universities what the GRE distributions were for like previous year's applicants to get an idea of what scores might be, what they might be looking for each of the sections. And I think it also depends a little bit too on which programs you're applying to. So for STEM, I think they might like value math a little bit more than reading, but you need to show that you're kind of capable in all of the areas.
Okay, so Jonah, I know you didn't have to write your GRE, and so I guess this question, or I think that answers Aaron's question about how much time do you need to study for the GRE. But if not, Aaron, if you had any more specific questions, feel free to just write that out. But I guess, you know, how important is the GRE in terms of, you know, if you're a undergrad and you're not sure where you want to go to school for a grad degree, but you're pretty certain that you would like to pursue a grad program of some kind, should you sort of assume that you might have to write the GRE and maybe at least do some prep, or is it something you kind of only need to worry about once you know you're applying to a school that requires it?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that probably varies on what types of schools you're looking at or when you decide. For myself, it was really late that I decided that I was going to pursue my master's immediately after finishing my undergrad. So I started looking for programs kind of in early October of my fifth year of undergrad. So when I did come across a couple programs that I was interested in that required it, it was far too late, because they would have required the score kind of in December when that deadline was due. You know, in my case, it worked out well that I found this program at Cambridge that didn't require it. But for example, Oxford, the equivalent program, you had to have it, so couldn't apply to Oxford. So yeah, you know, if you think that you're going to apply for grad school, you know, start to think of what are kind of the standard application processes for your program. You know, some disciplines just automatically require something like that versus others. perhaps not, especially a lot of direct entry PhD programs in Europe and in Canada for that matter, like you mentioned, West, don't often require it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's, I guess, move on here. We have a question from Halima, and also, hi, Marta. Welcome to the panel. Okay, so I guess I'll introduce you quickly, Marta. So Marta is was a 2014 Schulich Leader at McMaster. She got her Bachelor of Science in Chemical Biology, and currently she is a Master's of Science candidate in Computer Science at the University of Toronto. Marta, if I got any of that wrong, please correct me.
No, it's all correct, other than no longer candidate. As of a few days, I officially got the degree, so.
Right, okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
And did I hear that you're pursuing PhD now, or?
I want to eventually, I think, but I'm not sure what direction I want to go in yet. So I want to take some time off and go work for a bit and really figure out what I want to get for my PhD and figure out where I want to do it, who I want my supervisor to be. So I'm going to take some time off and think about that, and then hopefully next year jump back into a PhD.
Sweet. Okay, so getting back to Halima's question, she was just wondering if either of you had interviews with potential supervisors when entering grad programs, and then if you did, how did you prepare for those interviews? I guess we'll start with you, Marta.
Sure. So I guess my interview was kind of unexpected because I jumped fields from undergrad. I did my undergrad in chemical biology, which is a very chemistry-oriented science. And I decided I wanted to do my grad studies in computer science, which is very different. So I was used to interviews in science where they're mostly about research goals and kind of how best to fit into the team and different team dynamics, and how my skills could potentially be of use to the team. And then I had an interview with a computer science professor, and it started off well, and then he asked me a technical question, and I wasn't prepared for it at all. So it kind of took me off guard, and so he wanted to pretty much see how I would solve different problems. So I would say, depending on the field, it is best to prepare for the interview that way. So now I can say that if you're applying to computer science, you should be prepared for technical questions. Science, I saw less of that. So yeah, that was my experience with applying to grad school.
Sweet. Jonah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, mine was maybe a little bit different in the fact that I interviewed twice. So the first time for my MPhil, it was based on what I submitted, which was a short statement of kind of research interests. I didn't have to specify a supervisor, but was interviewed by the director of the program. It was really short. I think it was 12 minutes over Skype, super fast, and was, just really, it seemed like it was just to see that I was a real person more than anything. Versus when I was 6 months into my MPhil, I interviewed for continuing to do the PhD here. And at that point, I'd started working with my supervisor. We worked together to build up a proposal and present that to a panel of five potential supervisors. So that was like a pretty intense process. And but yeah, kind of this, I worked really closely with the supervisor to come up with my proposal. So it became a lot of, more specific questions around methodology or gaps in literature, because we'd had that time to really think about it and be guided through the process. So yeah, kind of very, very different experience than Marta.
And Ella, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I had interviews as well for my applications. So basically after the initial application round, pretty much all the universities had interviews with like either one or two faculty members. And like Marta said, it was kind of a mix of behavioral questions and then also some technical questions. Nothing really too in-depth, but more just kind of seeing how you think about the problems and how you would approach problems, and a little bit more like theoretical level type questions. And then one thing I found really valuable was, so once I was accepted, at like a couple of different schools. There were visit weekends to just kind of tour the campus, visit a couple labs, and meet with professors. And I found those interviews really valuable, just to be able to talk to some of the faculty members within my like subfield more in depth. And then it was kind of more of a two-way conversation with trying to first get an idea of whether their groups would be a good match, whether their research is something I was interested in, and also just meeting some of the other students in their groups. So that was kind of the first step to finding an advisor at the university, like at Stanford, where I ended up accepting the offer.
Cool. Great. Okay, so we have a couple more new questions here. So this one's from Gibson, and I think it's specifically for you, Ella. So why did you decide to go directly into a PhD thesis at Stanford rather than a master's in electrical engineering first? And how would an application directly to a PhD differ from an application to a master's?
Yeah, sure. So I actually applied in Canada. I applied to a few universities for master's programs, and then in the States, it was pretty much all direct to PhD programs. So just in the US, like it's not as typical to do a master's and then a PhD. It's more like if you want to do a master's and then go into industry, you'll just do a master's and then that's a terminal degree. And if you want to do a PhD, you'll do a direct to PhD program. And so mine at Stanford also included like a master's coursework. So you would basically do all the classes that are required for the master's students. You could count some research credits for that. So it was like slightly less, but so I did that for my first 2 years here, but it's still a direct to PhD program, kind of indicating that you want to pursue like research instead of just the coursework-based masters in the States. So I did apply to both. I kind of knew that long term I wanted to do a PhD. So when I was applying to master's programs in Canada, that was like a step towards eventually doing a PhD. And then I think the differences I noticed in the applications, which is just speaking to the universities where I applied, was I was typically expected to have more of an idea of a research focus going into the PhD than the master's applications were more general, and kind of like you were expected to learn what area you wanted to go into during the master's, and kind of delve into more of a focus there.
Great.
I find that, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, go for it.
Onto that, like I find that like in Canada also, like the attitude towards masters, that they're more exploratory. So if you don't know you want to go into something, a master's is a really good opportunity to figure that out. And for example, if you want to explore a new field, it's a good time to take those courses and figure out if it's something you want to do. And PhD, I would say, is something where you are more certain that you want to spend that time commitment and develop your research over those years. So sort of, it's good to be more sure that you like that field when you go into a PhD, because it's harder, it's more of a commitment, and it's harder to switch once you get in.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's partly. I was going to say, and that's maybe in the UK. What's quite common is programs that they call them 1+3s. So you do a single application, but it's for two separate programs that you do a 1-year master's and have the option of an out at that point, and then 3 years for the PhD. Mine, I have a lot of friends that theirs were structured that way. Mine was structured that I had to apply twice, but the 1+3 model is quite common here. And with, again, another high value on having a master's in Europe versus in the US, it is seen as kind of this, either you didn't finish your PhD or, it's really for industry.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a question for the three of you from Abington, and they are wondering how the funding process for graduate school works. So do you have to actively apply to fellowships or scholarships, or does the university cover some of your costs or all of your costs? I guess, Jonah, we could just start with you.
Sure. So Cambridge works in a couple different ways depending on what program you're in. And this is quite common. I would say this is common to most universities in the UK, that either you apply specifically to a funded position that has a clear research project already defined and you're joining that team and there's funding available, or you apply as a student that has to come up with the funding. So Cambridge, Oxford, the other big universities, Imperial, et cetera, all have large central pools, kind of like most Canadian universities. or in my case, my scholarship was fully underwritten by my department. And then I still apply for other fellowships, such as SHRC or NSERC or CIHR equivalent type scholarships. There's equivalents elsewhere. So yeah, I'm in the midst of waiting to hear back about my SHRC application. The colleges here have money. You're always asking for money and applying for money. It's something to expect, especially if you continue on into a PhD or into academia. You're always looking for grants and fellowship opportunities. So it's the start of a long process and a skill to hone in on.
Yeah, I think I've heard that, you know, a large portion of a researcher's time is dedicated to sort of writing up grant applications. So it definitely seems like something that you'll have to hopefully get really good at. Okay, great. Marta, do you have anything you want to add? Or
2 comments. One comment is I find that sometimes there are periods of weeks where I don't touch my research just because I'm writing, whether it's different applications or grants. So it's good to like writing when you go to grad school, definitely. But it's also good to know that things aren't so different from Canada and England. So I find that very much the same funding story. So the Department of Computer Science at the University of Toronto is pretty well funded. So if you go to school here, you are guaranteed a funding package, which is really nice. But also you have opportunities to apply for different scholarships and grants and fellowships. So you can always find additional sources of income, which is also pretty nice. Yeah.
And would that be something you could do throughout your graduate program? You could apply for scholarships while you're currently studying?
Yeah, so there are quite a few scholarship opportunities. There are the government ones like the NSERC, CIHR. So those happen. There's one specific scholarship for master's students that a lot of people apply to, but also within the Department of Computer Science, there are specific scholarships depending on your subfield. There are also travel grants. So if you want to travel to a conference, you can get that partially funded. So yeah, lots of opportunities. If sometimes I like searching the web because asking people who have also applied to these scholarships is really useful because it's a great in to know different scholarships that I wouldn't have heard of otherwise.
And Ella, did you want to talk about anything funding related?
Yeah, sure. So at Stanford, there's, again, like I guess at U of T, there's like a pool of funding basically for incoming PhD students. So in electrical engineering, you're basically guaranteed to come in with either 1 year of full funding or 3 years of full funding for the PhD. And then those are kind of like the different fellowship levels that you can come in with. And then after that, it comes from either a combination of applying for like external fellowships, grants from like your projects that are funded or from your research advisor. And then there's also lots of opportunities for funding via acting as a TA for different classes. I don't know about at other universities, but it actually pays pretty well at Stanford. And for some departments, it's even required that you do that for like a couple quarters during your PhD.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to highlight, is that different programs may have the expectation that your funding does come with the requirement to teach. That's just something to keep in mind. I mean, I know a lot of business schools, you typically do have to. I don't have to do any teaching to keep my scholarship, which is good if you're doing a lot of research work. So something else to keep in mind.
Okay, I'm going to get back to some of these advanced questions. There was one about financing, but I think we've sort of covered that with the questions you just answered. So another question from Aaron was, do you know how much work experience, like such as internships at notable companies, helps your sort of application or helps your chances of getting into a program? So for example, having an internship at Apple or Tesla, or some of the really well-known companies. Jonah, I'll let you go first just because you're on the big screen right now.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the kind of program that you're applying to. particularly, you know, if you're applying for a more professional master's program like an MBA or a master's in finance or law, some of that experience might be looked upon more favorably, you know what I'm trying to say, favorably, or might be a requirement for that matter. You know, for myself applying into a business school, the fact that I had worked for 3.5 years in a bank was a good selling point, that I could speak the language of innovation and product and a lot of the topics that we talked about in my master's program, even in a research context or a research degree, it definitely helped. So, you know, it's never going to harm you, I guess, is what I'm going to say, because Aaron, it looks like you've had some pretty cool internships.
Yeah, Ella, did you want to maybe talk about that, especially in terms of maybe in an engineering program?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like that kind of experience is probably really valuable for an application. I myself hadn't really done an industry internship before starting my PhD program. I'd done 3 more like research-based internships during my like summers in undergrad, but I think that experience definitely would probably be really valuable for an engineering grad school application.
And Marta?
Yeah, I mean, all I'm going to add to that is I know that the coders who work in industry have much better code than I do, so it definitely helps. But yeah, I think that you guys have all the main points.
Cool. And I guess kind of on that note, you know, how important is past research experience for getting into a grad program? And I guess, Marta, we could start with you.
Sure. I would say that, so I did 3 different research internships in 3 different fields. And so none of the research was related, but the stuff that I learned about working independently and learning how to problem solve when research isn't going well, learning how to collaborate with people who aren't in my field of research, that was very valuable. So getting exposure to, because it's totally a different type of work experience than I ever thought it would be. It's much more independent. It's not like the classes that I took in science and computer science are very different from the research that I'm doing in this field. So getting into research early and figuring out if it's something you want to do, I think is very important. Yeah, so and if you can do it in, even do like a research internship over the summer in undergrad and figure out if you want to go into grad school. Because I know a lot of people who go into grad school and it's nothing like they thought it would be like. And some people are surprised, but other people are also disappointed. So it's, yeah.
Ella, did you have anything you want to talk about in terms of previous research experience?
Yeah, so I basically did 2 summers at the same lab, like in Winnipeg at St. Boniface Hospital. So that was kind of more like biomedical engineering focused research. And then the summer between my 3rd and 4th year, I did a research exchange to Germany, where I was working on kind of a more mechanical engineering focused project there. So definitely not relevant to what I'm doing now. But I think, like Marta said, it's really good to get experience just to see what that kind of work is like. To determine whether you're actually going to like it. And for me, it was really valuable to work with different groups and to get an idea of like what maybe meshed really well, like for me in terms of working with other people in a research environment. And then also just giving me an idea of what kind of sub-focus I wanted to go into, because I'm in like biomedical engineering basically now as my subfield within EE. And I didn't focus on that as in terms of coursework during undergrad, but having that exposure during my research internships was really valuable at seeing that I really enjoyed that type of research.
Cool. And Jonah, is there anything you wanted to add to what Marta and Emma or Ella had said?
Yeah, I guess maybe to pick up on Aaron's question a little bit is that you can also utilize some of your professional experience to talk about maybe research experience you have as well. So I jumped over into the social sciences and largely doing qualitative research. So I didn't have any research experience in my undergrad, but I was able to talk a lot about how my job and professional work was in a way qualitative research, or answering questions, or how you can use some of those transferable skills. So I think out of my class of 8 last year on my master's, I think only 1 or 2 actually had any kind of formal research experience, and the rest, this was a program that either they had some professional background or had done a little bit in their undergrad. So, you know, it's not super important, but you know, you kind of have to know that you want to do it too. It's a big thing to jump into without having done something along the lines of research. So just keep that in mind.
There's no new questions, so I'm just gonna sort of jump into some questions that I have, but if either of you three have questions, or you have topics you know you want to talk about, feel free to bring those up as well. But I did want to ask a question about references. So I'm assuming that all of you, when you're applying, you had to get multiple academic references. So how did you sort of go about picking your references, as well as you know, requesting that they write you a recommendation letter? So Ella, could you go first?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, all my applications needed some number of different reference letters. So for basically all of them, I asked that one of my previous research advisors from like 2 of my past internships write the reference letter. I think it's really valuable to get a reference letter from somebody who you've worked with in some way, like either a professor who was your advisor for summer research, or like a boss from a job or something like that, just that you've worked with in some capacity previously. And then I also got some references from professors that I had taken like either one or multiple courses with. One of them was my like undergrad thesis advisor, who obviously also got to know my work quite well during that final year. And then I was always someone who really liked going to office hours a lot. So I had the chance to talk with quite a few different professors throughout my courses in undergrad. So I found that having that past experience, just like communicating with them, really made it a little bit easier to approach them to ask for a reference letter, because they like knew me a little bit and knew my work from the course.
Great. Marta, did you want to speak about your experiences with references?
Sure. So I needed 3 reference letters for the program I was applying to. The first 2, I had a pretty good idea of who I want, like they were my lab supervisors, and I was confident that they would say something nice about me. The third one, because I was applying to a computer science program, I didn't have any computer science research experience, so I kind of struggled to find someone who would vouch for me, or like I didn't have any idea of who I could ask. But then I ended up asking one of my computer science professors, who I had taken an advanced computer science course with. And even though I had only known her for a little bit, but she sat down with me to sort of talk about what I wanted to do and why I wanted to apply to computer science. And then she said that she would write me a reference letter and vouch for me. And so I guess my advice would be that even if you are applying to somewhere completely different, you can always ask someone to help you out. And most cases, they are nice and they will say yes. So I know my supervisor has done that for a lot of people, where if someone is really passionate about something and they want to go into that field and try something new, there's always someone to help you out. It's just a matter of finding the right person. So after I got into my master's program, I realized how important those reference letters were, because my supervisor told me that it was because of those reference letters that I stood out and that he wanted to take me into his lab. So taking that time to find the right people to vouch for you, I would say, is something very valuable and something that you should spend a lot of time on.
Cool. And Jonah, did you want to add anything as well?
Yeah, the only thing I would maybe add, because I think the process for me was very similar, but just that the same people might not be the right references for every program. If you're applying to multiple places. So my 2 references for Cambridge were 2 completely different people than the 2 for the master's program I applied to at University of Calgary, where I did my undergrad, because the focus of the programs was very different. So just keep that in mind as well. And you know, maybe the one thing I didn't do well throughout my undergrad was nurture some of those relationships that, you know, you get to the point where you think, oh, I need 2 or 4 or 6 different references, and you're trying to count up the number of profs you maybe know well enough to go knock on their door a couple of years later. So it's tough, but like others said, you know, there are lots of people out there willing to help, and even sitting down for a half an hour coffee to chat with that potential reference writer about what they're interested in, how they got into the field, and then your interest of being in that field. You never know, it can open a lot of doors, and it sounds like it worked well for you, Marta, to just chat with somebody, right?
Cool. Okay, so there's a new question from Jesse, and this is for you, Marta, specifically, and it's just about how did you decide you wanted to study something so different in your master's than what you studied in your undergrad? And then did you ever feel sort of discouraged because of that? Did you ever feel that you were at a disadvantage? So could you just sort of speak about that whole experience about shifting fields?
Sure. Yeah, so I kind of discovered computer science pretty late into my undergrad. I was in like towards the end of my third year that I even figured out what it was. And I decided I wanted, so I was working in a biomedical engineering lab in third year and fourth year, and I really liked the research. I really liked the lab I was in, my supervisor. But then I was looking at grad programs and none of them really excited me. I was kind of discouraged at how long wet lab experiments were taking me and the kind of research that I wanted to do. It was just a very slow process and I wanted something a bit faster. And then technology is kind of like seeping its way into everything. So I was like, okay, maybe this is something that I should pursue. So I really wanted to combine computer science with science, and the University of Toronto is really cool because we are down the street from 5 major hospitals. So there are lots of labs that are inside hospitals. So that was my decision process and how I ended up here. And the second part was, did I ever feel discouraged? Yeah, so I guess one of the good and bad things of grad school is that prereqs don't always matter. It is a lot easier to get away with getting into a program or taking classes without prereqs, which is great because I didn't have a lot of them, but it's also a lot harder because once you get into those classes, you realize that there's a lot you need to catch up on. So I remember being in my first machine learning class in grad school and not having a lot of the prereqs, and I was sitting next to people who had prereqs and had taken internships and did their whole degrees in computer science. So it was very intimidating, but at the same time, that also motivated me to work harder. So it was a very tough semester, the first one for sure. Definitely felt like I was at a disadvantage and definitely felt like everyone I was talking to was smarter than me and more than me. But I made good friends who studied with me. I had a good study group, and I also talked to my supervisor a lot about areas in my research where I could improve. So I don't regret it. It was one of the toughest but also most rewarding things that I have done so far.
Awesome. So I guess now maybe to ask Jonah and Ella a question, because you're both studying internationally, and what was the primary motivation to study abroad or study at a school outside of Canada? And I guess we could start with you, Ella.
Yeah, so I was not set on going outside of Canada for grad school. I applied to many schools in Canada as well. And then I think once I kind of finished up my applications, I had a chance to do some campus visits, meet with professors at a few different schools. And I just really had a great experience when I came for visit days at Stanford, just touring the labs, talking with professors and other students. There were a lot of labs that seemed like could potentially be a really good match for me in terms of the research areas that I was interested, and having good experiences talking with the professors during those one-on-one interviews. So I think it was more like a school-specific decision for me. I didn't particularly, I wasn't set on coming to the United States at all. I just had a really great experience during the visit days here, and that helped me make the decision.
Great. And Jonah? Yeah, for me, when I applied for my Master's of Philosophy, it was really, I was excited by the fact that it was only a 9-month program here in Cambridge. So partly was the short, intensive part of the program, And the second part was just I had an advisor that really pushed me to think big about the schools that I applied to. So without her, I definitely wouldn't have applied to Cambridge. I didn't think I would get in. They didn't have the GPA requirements that were posted, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really just a moonshot that worked out. But then, to continue here doing my PhD, a lot of it was around, factors more about the program again, that it was, the size of the group, the fact that my supervisor and myself, that's our group, we have one-on-one supervision, the fact I don't have to do any teaching as part of my fellowship or studentship, some other factors. But I'd looked at other programs in Europe just to stay outside of Canada to a certain extent and get some international experience. Depending on what kind of field you're in, there might be certain hotbeds for that kind of research. So Cambridge is really well known for organizational theory. The only other place that's kind of a similar concentration is Edmonton, and I didn't want to be back in Alberta.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so we're getting close to the 45-minute mark, and I think that's where I was hoping to sort of end it. So I think we probably have time for a couple more questions. And then I definitely would like to sort of ask the three of you where you see your graduate degrees taking you. So hopefully we can end on that note. But just a question from Gibson. He's wondering if there are benefits for going directly into grad school right out of an undergrad, or did any of you consider taking a gap between your undergrad and your graduate program? Jonah, maybe you go first.
Yeah, so for me, like I said, I decided quite late in the year to decide to go to grad school because it was quite short. It didn't seem like a gap. I guess I should say I was looking at two different ways of doing it. I thought I was going to stay at the company I was working at. I was able to get a year off to be able to do a 9-month master's, or I'd applied to do a program in Calgary just part-time. So both of them were kind of this way that I didn't have to give up my job and could still go to grad school. That was why I didn't really think about a gap. But that being said, I had worked for 3.5 years while I was doing my undergrad, so I knew that I still wanted to keep going. But if you're not 100% set yet, that year of just work experience or traveling or whatever you want to do in that year can really help solidify, what type of program. Maybe it's a different field than what you studied in your undergrad. You never know what kind of comes up for opportunity if you give it a little bit of time to grow and nurture that interest.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I guess with you, Ella and Marta, do you think that there's a benefit, or does it make a difference whether or not you go directly into a grad program, or if you take some time off? Does that affect your likelihood of being accepted? Ella, did you want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of being accepted, in my experience, just anecdotally, I don't think it makes a difference. I have a lot of students who are admitted in the same year as me who did take time off in between and worked for a couple of years, honestly, maybe close to 50-50 even, in terms of students who started the program at the same time as me. I went directly out of undergrad. And I think maybe the advantage there is that you're still kind of in the mindset of being a student. So it's not like an adjustment to start taking classes again. You were just doing that the year before in undergrad, and just like having kind of a student schedule is still it's not foreign to you anymore. So that maybe helps with the adjustment. But at the same time, I think if you take a little bit of time off and have a specific goal in mind, in advance for an area that you want to focus in on more, maybe that helps you with getting integrated with a group in a research project as well. So I think there's definitely advantages to both. I don't regret starting right after undergrad. I think specifically in terms of courses, I would have found it really hard to get back into taking classes if I had taken even a year off in between. And I found as well, so Stanford has rotations to kind of find what research group you want to join. And I think if we didn't have that, it would have been harder for me to narrow in on a specific research focus, and having maybe some industry experience would have helped with that.
Great. Marta, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that was a really good point, where if you want to go into research, but you want to take some time off, maybe an internship that'll help you with that research. So doing a position that might open a door to doing that research would be really useful. But also it's really good, even if you don't know whether or not you want to go into research, taking time off is also it can give you clarity and give you a different perspective on things. So that's kind of where I am in my life now. Like I went into grad school right after undergrad, and I kind of wish I took a break. I wish I took a year off to work and sort of figure out things, I guess, more confidently that I want to do. So I'm doing that now, where I want to take some time off and work and travel a bit, and then figure out if a PhD is something that I really want to do, and kind of figure out better what I want to do with that PhD.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start wrapping things up. So one question I'd like to ask the three of you is, what was the biggest, now that you've sort of been in your grad program, what was the biggest, I guess, I don't know how to word this, but difference between what your expectations were versus what it was actually like? So Marta, did you have anything you wanted to highlight in that regard?
Yeah, I think grad school is a lot more fun than I thought it would be. I was kind of used to the grind of undergrad, but I had some really good times in grad school. I met a lot of cool people, done a lot of cool things I didn't think I would do. So really happy I did it. Computer science is a great master's program to do if anyone's considering it, or if you want to find out more, I'm happy to talk about it offline. But yeah, if you are thinking about a master's, I would say it's a good time to explore things that you might be interested in.
Cool. Ella, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also really enjoying grad school. I think for me, so the first 2 years, because I was doing like a joint master's PhD program, there was still a lot of like coursework and kind of weekly problem sets and constant midterms and exams and everything. And then I think once I wrapped up with that last summer, it's been an adjustment since then, just in terms of not having kind of like the weekly feeling of accomplishment from like finishing your PSET or doing your midterm. And so I think for me, it's been really valuable just to kind of look at things on a longer term and be able to see internally that I'm like making progress and kind of working towards a research goal long term, as opposed to kind of continually just submitting things week after week. And I'm really enjoying that now. It was definitely an adjustment though in the summer.
Cool. And what about you, Jonah?
Yeah, I think for me, the most exciting part, or the part that I wasn't expecting, is just how much when you join these programs, you're really joining a community. So I feel really well connected to the rest of the people that are in my program, and even though we're all researching very different things, it's great how you really have a team behind you. And as much as undergrad is a team sport, to make it through, PhD is definitely the same way, if not more so. But yeah, I want to pick up a little bit on Ella's comment that it is also a big adjustment in terms of, milestones look very different in the life of a PhD. That it's, you might be working for 6 weeks to submit a conference paper, and then you're like, oh, well, that's done. What do I do now? And start again writing for the next conference submission. So there's a lot of adjustments, but it's been really, really fun.
Cool. Yeah, I would imagine that the relationships you establish with profs or supervisors would be a lot different as well. Yeah, okay, anyway, so I think just as the last question, I think it would be great to ask the three of you sort of, what was the main motivation to pursue further education, and then also where do you see your grad program taking you afterwards? Jonah, we could start with you.
Yeah, so I think the main motivation for me was really this desire to be able to ask big questions, and academia is a space where you can both ask big questions and you're supported to find an answer to them. Nowhere else in the world is your time protected to solely, uncover an answer to something that you truly care about. So in terms of where might my program lead me, You know, I'm not really sure. I'm only 3 months into the PhD now. But the advantage of doing a PhD, and especially if you shoot towards top institutions, it opens up, you know, a tremendous number of doors. It definitely doesn't close any. So we'll see where I end up. Maybe ask me that next year.
Awesome. What about yourself, Ella?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my experiences that I had with research in undergrad. And like Jonah said, I think just having the opportunity to explore problems relatively freely, and to be able to, like, if something comes up, kind of pursue that avenue and just like go with the flow a little bit in terms of research was something really valuable to me. I think it's also wonderful to be able to work in a collaborative environment. My group works a lot, we're in electrical engineering, but with a lot of different people over in the medical school. And I think that's something that's been really interesting and valuable for me as well. I think long-term, I definitely want to stay in like the medical devices and technology field. And I'm definitely open to like both industry and academia, and kind of exploring both of those options during the last few years of my PhD.
Cool. And lastly, Marta, what about yourself?
Yeah, I really like grad studies because I'm a very indecisive person and I don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. So it's good at like Ellen and Jonah said, giving you the freedom to sort of do whatever you want. You have a boss that is your supervisor, but your boss wants you to explore things, which is really exciting. I think that's very unique to graduate studies. And also you meet a ton of people, which is really exciting, very interesting people. Yeah, and I would say it gives you the freedom to sort of do whatever you want, which is exciting, but also could be scary, which is also something that I really enjoyed, sort of figuring out, becoming more independent thinker. But yeah, it's a very unique experience.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for making the time to participate in this webinar. I think you've all provided really great insight to everyone that's participated. Hopefully, I've recorded this conversation as well, so we're hoping to post it up for those that couldn't attend. And I guess to everyone that's participating, if you think of any more questions you wanted to ask, I encourage you to reach out to the three of our panelists. I'm sure they'd be more than willing to answer. I hope I'm allowed to say that. But yeah, no, I think this was amazing, and we're hoping to do more in the future. So definitely stay tuned for updates in Facebook for future panels. And with that, thank you all for attending, and have a great Sunday afternoon or evening or wherever you are in the world. See you all later.
Thanks.